Chapter 7. Today Berlin was starting a new book. When he began reading it on his lunch break, he knew nothing about it except its title, Encountering the Direct Ones, and the name of its author, J.C. Persild. He never read the description on the back of a book, certainly not if he respected the author as he did in the case of Persild. Many years before he had discovered Persild's Hey World system has no steadfast hoop. He had recently reread that last book, and seeing so many things in it that he hadn't the first time, had decided to try the former, as it was arguably the most celebrated of Persild's works. What follows are excerpts from Berlin's reading during that lunch hour. Firecrackers and cheese allotted to Kirk's region since 2009. The direct ones, as they came to be known in the pages of the tabloid press, soon had divided the land among themselves. The strongest of them, Kirk, had an impregnable but economically feeble fiefdom nestled beneath the crook in the Guntega Mountains. In order to maintain his large standing army of aesthetically minded malcontents, Kirk encouraged the manufacture of popular art. This brought in money from not only the neighboring lands of his fellows among the direct, but from distant realms like Hollywood and Clouterpale. It was a charity in the latter town that, on hearing of Kirk's people's plight, put the loosely defined geopolitical region onto their firecrackers and cheese assistance rotation. With the regular shipments of firecrackers and cheese, Kirk's administration was soon able to attract top talent like Colossor, Protago Girl, and the mighty Dentlong. The curious and the hopeful subsequently began coming to Kirk's region, some to stay and cause trouble. One of those who came to stay, but never to cause trouble, was a band of relatively young people who called themselves Hitler's Dog. "Why do you call yourselves Hitler's Dog?" was the question they were most frequently asked during their sojourn. The obvious answer, later to be used as the title of a short story by Todsgebode, is because Blondie was already taken. The band's guitarist and its singer were considered the frontmen of the band. They did most of the speaking, whether from the stage or to the media. The guitarist, Chester Field, was determined to stick with the name. "I want to demystify the name Hitler," he said on more than one occasion. Red Bledsoe, the singer, wasn't so sure. "We haven't had any real exposure yet," he argued in private. "It's not too late to change the name." Everybody in the band knew that changing the name after they had publicly announced their presence would make them look weak. Weston, the theatrical agent who had taken the band under his feather-like brows, urged them to make up their minds now. "Because," he told them during a meeting, "you can make the name Hitler's Dog work. Like I've told you before, you will encounter unique difficulties no matter which way you decide on this or any other matter that is likely to come up in your career. So the thing to do is determine which kinds of difficulties and which specific hardships do you want to avoid." "And act accordingly," Cheryl's mother added after the above sagacity was repeated verbatim during a visit from the bassist. "That's what Chester said," Cheryl told her mother. "Well, it sounds like excellent advice, but how do you implement it? That's when it starts to get vague." The older lady sat in the house she had coveted all her life. It was gigantic, gray, and gaudy. Cheryl sat on an uncomfortable chair thing and wondered if she'd be able to locate and pilfer some prescription pain medication before she had to leave. "I'm beginning to think that if we can't make it in Kirk's region, we won't be able to make it anywhere," Cheryl whined. "Isn't that funny that they still call it Kirk's region? All of the other former Direct League states have adopted regular names. Abomasum, Forky, Dongswill, those are regular names." "Cheryl, don't be so negative," the old lady begged. The ball of the Rectograph rests on the big toe, cushioned by a tiny pillow. "The administration still maintains a monopoly over the manufacture of these tiny pillows," Hudson Urag pointed at one of the objects in question as he led his group to the museum. "How long do you think it'll be before people start using the word government instead of administration to describe the formal structure of those in charge?" one of the tourists in the group asked. He looked like a wise-ass, about 20 years old, wearing a baseball cap with copious amounts of curly hair protruding from beneath its limits. His tall, gawky stature and glasses only increased the impression of intellect unbound by experience. "I really couldn't say," Hudson Urag, still inclined and indicative, replied. As he righted himself, he was confronted with another question. "Doesn't a state monopoly like that conflict with the original philosophy of the direct ones?" an old man in recently purchased clothes asked. Possibly," Hudson Urag eyed his group one by one as he answered. "However, I will point out that the administration once controlled nearly 100% of the economic activity in the region, and that percentage is continually falling. I only mentioned that about the tiny pillows as an extra piece of trivia for you, not to express some political opinion through veiled means. Now, if you'll all follow me into the next room, I'll show you something truly exceptional." Jensen Jordan, not officially part of the tour group but within its orbit for the past 20 minutes, stayed behind to examine the life-size model of the Rectograph and operator. "Impressive use of resin, wouldn't you say?" a voice behind him asked. Jordan turned and saw an old man slightly stooped by the evaporation of the last century, wearing an old tweed coat and an oversized beret. His eyes were alive with friendliness. "I suppose so," Jordan replied. "The first time I saw one of these sculptures I was taken aback, not because of the realism, but because of the frozen mutability of the sculpture, the potentiality that the figure embodies." The old man's voice was practiced. He had done some lecturing in his time, yet Jordan could sense desperation in there somewhere. This was a man that longed for human interaction. "I find it blasphemous," Jordan told him. "Blasphemous?" the old man repeated. "In what way?" His still black eyebrows arched their inchworm backs in confusion. Rollo Vip didn't play the Rectograph. He played the concertonail. The old man stared at the exhibit from bottom to top, his mouth soundlessly trying out phrases of opposition. "What's the difference?" he finally settled for asking. Jordan pointed at the resonator cone upon which the flesh-toned figure sat. "The concertonail has 2 resonators, both larger than that, one up high, usually decorated with the Eye of Costa, and on the other end of the slider board, sometimes decorated with the Anus of Saul, although that last one is often disguised by a defunct pictogram, unfortunately." The old man's head jerked spasmodically. His burgeoning waddle shook like a stalactite of flan. He hesitated. You sound knowledgeable in these matters." Jordan smiled. "I'm studying to be a tour guide," he explained, although his explanation did nothing to help an old man looking for his own group to lead. Today's atomic farm has put the 2-headed calf to good use. Just outside Schechterzamt, Cheryl's mother's family had turned the old homestead into a sightseeing opportunity for tourists on the road between Lakes Bukharin and the capital city of Kirk's region, Entangler's Nest. One day Hitler's dog was on their way back from a particularly fruitless weekend in Entangler's Nest when Cheryl realized that none of the other members of the band had ever seen the farm. "It'll be fun," she encouraged the others to stop. "Fun," Doug, the drummer, repeated. "Where have I heard that word before?" "Can you get us in for free?" Chester asked from the driver's seat of their rattletrap old school bus. "There's no charge," explained Cheryl. "Then how do they make any money?" "They sell jams and jellies and things with pecans in them." "Things with pecans in them," repeated Doug. "How can we resist?" The sign at the foot of the drive read, "Masson Luke's Farm, homemade preserves and oddities." The young people in the aprons manning the booths looked warily at the band's bus as it pulled into the gravel-covered parking lot. But when everyone realized it was Cheryl's band, they all crowded around to greet her and marveled at what a girl could do. "Let's go to the barn," Cheryl insisted enthusiastically. "What do they mean by oddities?" Chester whispered to Red as they walked along a well-marked path to the barn. "I think we're about to find out." In the barn, they stepped into an angry exchange between Don Massenluke, director of operations for Massenluke's farm, and a visitor named Melissa. "I don't care what the local cooperative extension agent told you. This is just plain cruel," shouted visitor Melissa, pointing overhead at a treadmill suspended from the ceiling on which a freakish 2-headed calf was walking, encouraged by a film playing on a TV set mounted just beyond the end of the treadmill. The film was a loop of a farmer walking backwards over a field, holding out a bottle of milk. Don Massenluke, red-faced and heavily mustached, was yet nowhere near the limits of his patience. He was getting angry, however. "Ma'am," he said somewhat louder than his normal speaking voice. We've already been investigated by PETA, and they didn't find anything wrong with it." This was a slight exaggeration. A group of tourists had come through last year sometime. Their vehicle had a PETA sticker on it. No one in that group had raised any objection to the public display of the 2-headed calf. Don, who had expected trouble from them, had taken this as a sign of favor. "Well, I don't see how." Melissa, her abundance of red curls thrashing about wildly, flailed her arms and shook her head. She and her companions, a tall man with tiny eyes and an older woman in a wheelchair, exited the barn in what might be termed a huff, were it not so manifestly principled. Don turned to deal with the newcomers. He was happily surprised to see Cheryl among them. "This is my cousin Don," Cheryl introduced the man to her band. "I don't know what she was so upset about," Don vented. "The power generated by that calf goes toward the grinding of corn to make baked goods. How much more eco-friendly can you get?" Red Bledsoe, staring up at the drooling, mewling creature, could only think of how he would like to put it out of its misery. Because Blondie was already taken. Within a year, Hitler's Dog was playing regularly on the tri-region circuit thanks to financial backing from the Massenlug Farm organization. The theatrical agent, Weston, was dismissed in favor of more professional representation. He left them all with a final admonition. Your decisions, even the minor ones, will determine your future. Think about who you ally yourselves with. Don Massenlug welcomed them into his office. You don't have to worry about who you step on if you own the ladder, he reassured them. Inevitably, there was talk about an album, something big that would catch the public's eye. Hitler's Dog began work on what would predictably be titled Because Blondie Was Already Taken. Chester had wanted to call it The Grown-Up World, but was informed that was more of a follow-up title. Each of the band members could taste how sugary the title was. But who knows, Red capitulated, maybe it'll become a classic album title. The album had 10 songs. Each was a little opera worked out over the course of the band's time together, written on the road in that horrible bus, or in tiny dark spaces grabbed during the lulls in their manic activity. The first song, That Which Is Tedious Is Fun, was typical of all their music, harsh, flat polygons of guitar, thick-headed riffs that refused to play along, small drums like those accompanying Lester Lannon at an ice cream social, bass seemingly disconnected from anything that is going on, and the singer, Red Bledsoe, sounding very much like an elderly Pee Wee Herman, bravely offering up blatantly bad advice. Other songs on the album, Revel in Your Limitations, and Those Who Love Life Get More Out of It, varied the tone by adding saxophone, played by Cheryl's brother Robin, who now considered himself a member of the band's additional personnel. The more he felt that the album title was a mistake, the more Chester demanded control over the cover art. Why don't we not have any cover art, Doug just suggested idealistically. What is this tradition that an album's worth of music must be accompanied by an official visual image? Of course, this suggestion was shouted down immediately. Hitler's Dog was going to be a traditional band with regular albums and all the usual hang-ups about merchandise. How about just a symbol, someone in the room said out loud. There were many people in the room, many who were not members of the band. No, I know what it's going to be, Chester insisted, like a Napoleon or an Alexander, talented warrior kings who can see the battlefield before the engagement. In capturing the image that he wanted presented, Chester took into account the obvious title of the album. He employed the services of a talented painter he had met hanging out at collegiate functions. A group of Massenlug employees were photographed inspecting the painting but preparing to burn it. The painting was against their belief system somehow. It depicted a pawnbroker massaging the sore shoulders of an elephant man. The elephant man was an anthropomorphic elephant, not some Victorian-era freak with bone deformities. He sat on a low stool with his feet in a pan of water. He was reading an old-fashioned newspaper, the kind with a small boy's library of comics in each issue. An ancient destabilizer from beyond the bowels of the planet. The painter whom Chester Field had contracted to create his masterpiece, the title of which artwork was Neck Brace Residue, was himself named de Manfred Thyroges. He was an older gentleman who, although not himself the product of academia, was yet popular with the college kids studying art. He's everything I'd like to be as a painter, Eddie enthused as he and his friends approached Thyroges' current residence. I wish he was everything he could be as a specimen of hygiene, Hank countered sourly. Just breathe through your mouth, Captain Stapleton, the leader of the little group, advised. He then motioned for discussion to cease as they came within hearing range of the front door. There were a multitude of miniature potted cacti crowded on the ground about the door. Some were under the protection of the tiny awning, and some were not. The yard was sand, ruthlessly raked to rid it of any grass or ground cover. Only occasional patches of mosses, clinging to territories abutting the roots of ugly old water oaks, gave life to the yard. Captain Stapleton knocked on the door. Yes, de Manfred Thyroges answered in a funny voice. He had known Eddie and his friends were coming. He had been waiting for them. He ushered them all into the front room, an unadorned oblong box littered with canvases and 2 old sofas. De Manfred, I'll come straight to the point, Stapleton began as soon as they had seated themselves and politely declined Thyroges' offer to show them his latest work. We'd like you to join a team currently being put together in order to study an ancient destabilizer from beyond the bowels of the planet. Interesting choice of imagery, the artist commented. Thank you, chuckled the captain. No, I mean it, Thyroges continued. I'm a painter. I deal in imagery. The bowels of the planet. It sounds earthy. He clawed at the air, scooping up imaginary cosmic droppings. Yes, well, our focus lies more in the direction of the ancient destabilizer, Stapleton told the other man. "What do I know of such things?" demanded Thyroge, standing up and throwing his hands over his head. "You're the smartest person we know," entreated Eddie. If anyone from Entangle's Nest is going to be there at the conference watching out for our interest, it's got to be you." "What exactly is a destabilizer?" Thyroges gesticulated with his fist from the doorway leading into the deeper interior of the house. "And an ancient one at that. I suppose it's some kind of counterweight." Eddie slapped his forehead and gaped at Hank, Captain Stapleton, and the Lindbergh brothers. "You see," he ejaculated, turning back to the painter. "You intuitively understand the situation." "I cannot go," Thyroges stated flatly, passing through the doorway and necessitating that the other men follow him back to an easel in the former nursery. The work on the easel was only half completed. Much of the scene was still nothing more than black lines on primed canvas. Thyroges stared at it as he reiterated his rejections. "I'm getting married," he announced finally. The friends of Eddie Cornsampler processed this news in silence. "That Johnson girl?" Hank asked, hoping that when he got to be an old man he wouldn't be a fool. Flowery upchuck, cheddar, and compassionate complete. Wang, the last of the direct ones to claim a territory, established his regional administration within the ample cubic feet of the Goulding building, in the heart of Entangler's Nest's financial and entertainment district. "Ethics dictate that one not mix business and pleasure," the expansive Wang explained at a dinner with his enemies, the Kirk's Region Commercial Parade. He moistened his fingertips at the edge of his glass of ice water. "But you gentlemen of Kirkland seem to thrive on such an explosive mixture." Brute Thorsky, the Commercial Parade's top agent, shifted in his seat. "You know those voices you're hearing in your head, Wang," he smiled. "They're your own." Wang smiled broadly in return, his eyes rolling back into his head as if recoiling at the effort of deciphering Tharsky's comment. "I'm getting goddamn sick and tired of hearing people say Kirkland," DeBrook, the parade's resident lady killer, later complained. "It's laziness," another of the jocks on the team added. "How you figure?" "Because it's one less syllable to pronounce." Bitter, muted laughter greeted the obtuse attempt at humor. "All right, you guys, scram." Mr. Green, the ethics advisor, entered the scene, throwing his arms out and scattering the currency cowboys like so many chickens. "Nathan, Bert, sit down with me over there." Two short-haired men in brown joined Mr. Green at a table against the wall in the old basement. The JCs had once used the space as a fundraising haunted house, and memories of that time informed Nathan's experience as he took his seat. "Nathan, Bert, we've got to decide what to do about this Wang." Mr. Green directed his words at his companions. "Mr. Green," Bert began, "before we begin, I just want to say what a thrill it is to be working with you. I heard about the Dakotas," he added, inclining his head towards the slightly older man. "If he had been wearing a crown, it would have fallen off." "Yeah, okay." Mr. Green acknowledged the praise like bubbles from a child's diversion popping in his face. "Now, as for Wang," Bert continued, "I imagine you asked me here because you feel I have a unique contribution I can make." "It is written in the entrails," Mr. Green concurred. "Well, I feel that I should say something that only I," he stressed the last two words, "so I don't need to, can say." "It stands to reason," admitted Mr. Green, glancing from Bert to Nathan and back. "Okay, then," Bert read it himself. "I realized my mechanical nature early, but developed elaborate emotional systems to disguise that perception. My uncle carried me through this basement," Nathan announced. "There was a skull painted there," he pointed to the wall opposite, "and a real one, a cow skull, in a cauldron somewhere over there." Now he pointed towards the far side of the room, where a mountain of old school desks stood. They were an untangleable nest. "But waiting for what bird to lay its gargantuan egg?" Mr. Green asked. Nathan lit over coffee. "Why, Wang, of course," answered Nathan, as Bert ran his eyes over the last month's figures. "Negatitty's crossbar, so airport." Wang's genius was to sponsor a band from rival region Abomasm. He cackled uncontrollably for several seconds on reviewing the band members' official photographs. They called themselves Negatitty. Wang yapped at one of his attendants. He cackled again. He whooped finally. "Such a clever name," he said to himself, taking up the photos again. Some days later, Travis, the leader of the band, was at his mother's house grabbing a few things from his old room. "I want you to be careful," his mother urged. "I will," Travis smiled. "It's not like Kirkland isn't civilized. If they weren't so rich, I'd have second thoughts about that." Travis stretched his mouth downwards. "Mama, that's quite philosophical," he told her. Inside he added, "For you." "It's a package tour," Travis continued. "We're touring with 4 other bands. It's an army of people. We're going to have fun, and we're going to make some money." He said his goodbyes, promised to return in a couple of months, and nearly ran outside where Solomon Brody, the band's only roadie, waited for him in the van. "You kiss your mama goodbye?" Brody asked. I don't think I officially did, Travis decided by rolling his eyes about and waiting for Brody to pull into traffic. During the next few months, Wang's Lieutenant Harrison revealed more of his expectations from the band in exchange for more financing. We're already on this tour, Daniel, the band's drummer pointed out. We don't need him anymore. And what about the next tour? Negativity's manager, Elron, demanded, as if soliciting feedback from a classroom of fifth graders. These things don't work like that. It's not automatic. Daniel, who still hadn't grasped the fact that everyone is money-based, bit back his next metaphor. The idealism of Saturday morning cartoons was not applicable here. Guys, all he's asking us to do is make an appearance. Travis, who rarely came to this section of the bus, spoke calmly and brotherly. He had on a white golf shirt and navy blue slacks. No one would ever suspect that the performance of terrible insanity that this man was capable of. The fact that it was performance, that is, theater of some kind, disturbed him now and then, but he had long ago decided that purism was the enemy. He would do damn well what he pleased, and do damn well whatever it took to be able to do whatever he damn well pleased. You're full of shit, Travis. Noel, the only one of the guys in the band able to stand up to Travis, shot back. This is a blatantly political festival. He wants documentation that we have lent our support and approval to some cause related to his... He flapped his hand like a bird that couldn't be caught. Career path, he ended gamely. This man Wang can buy you the record contract of your dreams, Elron nearly drooled as he described it. Travis was magnanimous enough not to mention that he had had assurances that these possibilities were not necessarily contingent on Travis having any associates when papers were signed. An appearance, he repeated. I don't think that's too much to ask. Upbraided and downgraded. I think next election we're going to have to go with Richard Massenlug. Swarthmore uncle Plaguesome, the unofficial director of the campaign, spoke in an undertone with Don Massenlug and Emily Flintard. They were standing only 2 or 3 yards away from the evening's vanquished challenger, Ricky Massenlug, as proclaimed on many thousands of dollars worth of posters around the country. The latter fellow, young, thin, not bad-looking in a sort of Ralph Reed raised in the rough way, sat slumped forward in a hotel chair. His eyes were tracing some path through the 20 years out-of-date pattern on the carpet. Mr. Massenlug, a young man at the door, called. The TV people are here. All right, this is it. Plaguesome, stout but agile, especially for a man of 76 years, hustled forward, arms out like cranes overhead, lightly but possessively touching the soon-to-be-renamed Ricky Massenlug on the shoulder. No more of this hangdog face, Richard, the old man whispered. His breath was surprisingly neutral, like cold air blowing out of mysterious pipes embedded in the ground. You are cheerful and confident, even in defeat. You are young, and the next election is only 2 years away. Besides, his voice became even softer, it's only county representative. You've got your mind on a bigger prize. Plaguesome smiled toothily. The teeth were fake. Young Massenlug smiled in return, drawing in breath and squaring his shoulders with its pneumatic effects. So, he intoned, exhaling, I'm going by Richard now, am I? I told you before, it has a more mature, responsible. They're here, grunted Don Massenlug, standing by during all of the above. He had been persuaded to remove his baseball cap for the occasion, but everyone said it just wasn't done without it. Mr. Plaguesome, how are you doing? The single reporter, trailing his cameraman, entered the room and greeted the campaign director. Well, considering it's the first campaign I've directed, pretty good. The old man, powerful despite his lack of direct political experience, jostled his torso into place within his expensive suit. Is your candidate ready to answer some questions? Indeed he was, Richard Massenlug declared, stepping forward. For the next 17 minutes the promising young man held forth on a number of issues, most of which were more national or international in scale than those likely to fill the agenda of a county representative. He closed his remarks at the urging of a determined nod from Plaguesome, coupled with a noticeable tightening at the corners of the reporter's mouth. Well, thank you very much, the reporter grinned again after it was all over. You're very welcome, Ray. How's Mr. Wright? Plaguesome asked about the owner of the TV station whence the reporter had come. As the two spoke, Don Massenlug drew Richard to one side. I think you handled that like a pro, he praised. Thanks. For one of the last times, Richard's face dissolved into that of a bashful boy before his father. I'll have to get used to Richard, though, he confessed, pulling his smile into a line more sardonic and immature. You will, Don assured him. You know, Mick Jagger had to get used to Mick. Dad, Richard sighed, embarrassed. Mick Jagger is his real name. No, Don shook his head. He was born Michael Philip Jagger, and all his childhood and teen years he was called Mike. The wisdom of Picasso. Jensen Jordan now worked for Extinction Records, the government-sponsored label that had purchased Hitler's Dog's contract. He served as a liaison between the group and persons interested in their safety. "Hey guys, how are you?" Jordan waved at Chester and Red as he ambushed their manager at the latter's office. "What the hell are you doing here, Jordan?" the band's manager, Lucky Steambath, threw himself between his charges and the government man. "Just need a little word with you and the band too, if that's all right, seeing as how it concerns them." He looked at Chester and Red. 20 minutes later, after Jordan had departed, Steambath was on the phone. "You know the fucking rules, Faraday. Your man deals with me. The members of the group are not to be disturbed with this business." A slight hesitation on Steambath's part before saying the word business indicated his own doubts as to whether it really was business after all. Chester leaned towards Red. "Do you remember that photograph of Picasso that the drifter had in his pocket?" "I think so," Red replied. "You remember how he had his hands up like this?" He put his hands up in the air as if explaining palmistry in a mirror. "Well, I think I know what he was saying." He was saying stop. Picasso was saying stop. That's right, he was saying stop. Picasso. Red took time to gather his resources. He gestured like a man describing a thimbleful of whiskey. He's saying stop. That is exactly what I am saying. Chester clutched his hands together prayerfully. Picasso is saying stop. It is the wisdom of Picasso, Red pronounced. The wisdom of Picasso. Chester took a deep breath. He realized that this would mean. You realize what this would mean. Not really. I'm talking about, well, effectively going on hiatus. Red started to reply, but was interrupted by Steambath's return to the conversation. "That's not going to happen again, I assure you." He shot the air with his hand while holding a pen as if it was a cigarette. "Lucky," Chester addressed the manager, "we're going to stop working for a while." Steambath's face fell slack. "Stop working? What do you mean?" he demanded. "Hitler's Dog is going to sleep," Chester explained. "I like that," Red chuckled. Steambath, however, pointed out the obvious flaw in their announcement. "What is Cheryl going to say?" Red and Chester glanced at each other. "She'll go along," Red affirmed, nodding his head sharply. "If she doesn't, there are going to be some unhappy people." Chester ran his hand over his chin, where a thin beard was beginning to grow. In time, perhaps he could start over again in another region. Everyone spoke English, so what the hell? In the manner of Monster Tremor. As a reward for his efforts on behalf of the city, de Manfred Thyroges was given access to the rarefied heights of the art world. Finally, after so many years of fringe dwelling and bottom feeding, he was selling his work. And for good money, too, the commercial parades de Baruch commented as he and his colleagues rooted through the band Negativity's financial papers. "Isn't it just the same old neo or pseudo-surrealist slop?" Vincent knew to the team wondered. "Don't ask me." DeBruck picked at his inner ear with a toothpick. "I don't know Charlie Brown from some rude diagram in the men's room." "Look, sir," one of the men raised his head from the files. "Some sort of statement about free guitar picks." "Let me see that," DeBruck ordered. Downstairs, Travis and his mother surreptitiously moved the box of the most important paper of all from its place of concealment, the plaster bust of Phil Collins in the foyer, to the trunk of Travis's mother's car. "You don't mind walking across the field?" Travis asked as he forced himself to relax and assume the demeanor of an innocent man. "No, baby, I need the exercise anyway," the old lady replied and headed for the highway in the distance. 2 weeks later, in the port of Mamare, Travis met with Wang's agent, Mr. Omnidick. "Couldn't Harrison make it?" Travis asked as he and the agent seated themselves in a tiny coffee shop overlooking the marina. "Harrison is no longer employed by Lord Wang." "Lord, is it?" thought Travis, but dared say nothing. "I have been empowered to act on Lord Wang's behalf," continued the rangy wooden man. "You know," Travis took a deep breath and began, "when I first got into music, I was into a band called Monster Tremor. They were the direct, immediate catalyst that inspired me to start my own band, although, obviously, there were innumerable factors involved, including many other bands, some of them much more influential on me, but both musically and personally, than Monster Tremor." "I remember Monster Tremor," Mr. Omnidick interjected. He told the waitress he wanted an espresso and returned his attention to Travis. "Well, many years later," Travis continued, "I got to meet Buck Camaro, the singer from Monster Tremor." "Was he an asshole?" Mr. Omnidick wondered. Travis glanced into the other man's eyes. "No, he was quite nice. In fact," he looked down at his hands, "he was most helpful." "Helpful? In what way?" "He told me a little trick to ensure my safety. "And what trick was that?" Mr. Omnidick asked. His neck made a creaking, straining sound as he twisted his head to one side and leaned slightly towards Travis. "Your espresso, sir." The waitress held the cup and saucer just below his nose. He could see the small, foamy, orange-rimmed bubbles on the surface of his beverage. The light directly over the table was reflected among those bubbles and broken into white crescents across the waves that rippled through the hot, aromatic drink as the girl placed it before him.